Here I am. Hello, welcome to everyone, both in person and joining us virtually. Today's presentation is coming from our Vice President for Research, Dr. Daniel Engebretson. Dan was previously the chair of the Biomedical Engineering Department at USD before starting as VPR in 2020. He is also the director of the Gear Center, which is part of USD's Discovery District up in Sioux Falls. Dan's PhD is in physical chemistry, and he is currently the PI for a Department of Defense grant, which aims to build artificial intelligence research capacity here at USD. However, the hat he's wearing today is firmly from the angle of his duty as VPR. Unless explicitly stated by the sponsor, all grant applications must include a line item for facilities and administration costs, or F&A. We hope that today's topic will establish a broader and more cohesive understanding of F&A costs associated with sponsor programs here at USD. So thank you so much for coming, and I'll let Dan get started.
Thank you, Gina. Let me share a screen. That screen, share sound, share. So everybody should be seeing PowerPoint presentation. It looks like they are. Again, thank you, Gina, for that introduction. Here's the title slide, Understanding F&A at USD. I'm me, and it's October 17th, 2024. So that's good to have a good base set for what's going on. For those of you that don't know me, I'm kind of a bit of a smart aleck. So that's the way I roll. Get the right thing. Why is the screen not advancing? There we go. Gonna start with a little video here that shows at least my interpretation of what I think most people think F&A is. And the purpose of today is kind of dispel this common myth. And so let me get this fired up and going.
Let's go, boys. The way that I approach work post-fatherhood has really been trying to understand the
my first paycheck! Look at the window, there's my name. Hi, me. I remember the day I got my first paycheck. There was a cave-in in one of the mines and 8 people were killed.
Wow, you worked in a mine?
I worked at a Dairy Queen. Why? God, isn't this exciting? I earned this. I wiped tables for it, I steamed milk for it, and it was totally not worth it. Who's FICA? Why is he getting all my money? I mean, what? Chandler, look at that.
Oh, this is not that bad.
Oh, you're fine. Yeah, for a first job, you can totally live on this.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Hey, by the way, great service to me.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent.
All right, so most people, I think, tend to take the perspective of F&A as a tax that we charge now, and so they see it as FICA. You know, it takes money out of your paycheck. I don't put money back in, and so but people come into building a budget usually with that notion that F&A is this tax that we have to charge, and part of that is just kind of driven by the budget process. So the next couple of slides, I've just taken a screenshot of the National Science Foundation's budget template. It's got the categories on it that we're all kind of used to thinking about. You've got your senior personnel, other personnel, fringe benefits, equipment. Those are some key items there. And then you've got travel, participant support, other direct costs. You add that all to your total direct costs, and then we hit you with the tax of indirect costs. And so really the way the budgeting process is set up kind of drives this notion that F&A is a tax that we charge to people for doing this. The purpose of today's talk is to understand what F&A is, or what they are actually. It's the facilities and administrative costs, and why they're important, and really why they're not a tax. So that's kind of the base set here for what we're going to try to accomplish today. Starting with some definitions. So this is literally copied and pasted from the Code of Federal Regulations. This is how the feds define what a direct cost is. And direct costs are those costs that can be identified specifically with a particular final cost objective, such as a federal award. So what you tell people in your grant application you're going to do and how you're going to do it, those are all going to be the direct costs associated with that. That's the salaries, the student support, the stuff you're going to buy. Indirect costs, F&A, they're equivalent terms. And you'll hear overhead also thrown in there sometimes. So really overhead, indirect costs, F&A, all the same sort of things. They are not defined within the Code of Federal Regulations. Other than they're everything that isn't a direct cost, which is really what NIH has as part of their definition in their example. The simpler direct definition here is indirect costs are those costs not readily identified with a specific project objective. So you've either got direct costs or indirect costs. Direct costs are very prospective things. They're things we're going to pay for if we get the award. So the salaries you're going to pay if you get funded, the stuff you're going to buy if you get funded, the students you're going to train if you get funded. They've always got that forward-looking element to them. Conversely, indirect costs are actually retrospective. They looked at what the university has done in the past. They're a percentage, a rate that we apply to a base. And that base we call the modified total direct cost. I'll define that in a little bit here. But for the most part, this money in facilities and administrative costs are money that has already been spent. So the F&A is purely a reimbursement to the university for costs that have already been incurred. Probably a really good example of this is think about an oil change. So if you've got an oil change shop that's out there, the direct costs are the oil, the filter, the labor that you have to put when that person shows up with their car to get their oil changed. But the only way that person is going to show up to get their oil changed is if you got a building, if that building's heated, and you got to dispose of all that waste. Those are the indirect costs that company are continually incurring as that goes on. They happen whether or not you have the grant, whether or not that person shows up to get their oil change company. So that's kind of a key distinction between direct costs and indirect costs. Indirect costs you're going to basically always have. You always have to be paying them regardless of what you actually end up doing. Now to touch on that term modified total direct costs, MTDC, these are again defined federally of what are modified total direct costs. And so any portion of a subaward in excess of $25,000 is a modified total direct cost. Equipment and other capital expenses, rental costs, charges for patient care, participant support costs, tuition remission, scholarships, and fellowships. So all of these things are modified total direct costs. And what that means to us is that we don't get to apply F&A rate to these costs. And a consequence of that is now it starts to get, once that award gets made and you've had your budget that has been approved by the sponsoring agency and things, it's really difficult to move things that were direct costs to modified total direct costs because you do or don't have to apply F&A to those things. So that can be a challenge that is faced by grants accounting. If somebody says, hey, I didn't pick up a student, so I've got this tuition remission that I don't need to use. Can I use that for buying supplies? They might say no, because now you're moving categories between what has F&A and what doesn't have applied to. USD's F&A rate, it is something that we get to negotiate with the Department of Health and Human Services, cost allocation services, HHS, CAS, every 5 years. And so we say HHS is our cognizant agency. So that's something that you might see on some of the documentation that they ask you to submit is who's the cognizant agency for your F&A rate. At USD, it's HHS. Office of Naval Research does most of the DoD awards. So HHS is the cognizant agency for about 3,000 universities, ONR, Office of Naval Research, for a few hundred, and then NSF and others for even a smaller. So most places are dealing with HHS. All of the rules for F&A are dictated by the Office of Management and Budget, and they're described in the Code of Federal Regulations. It's when I start typing that into my Google search, it auto completes. I go there frequently to get some guidance from CFR. Now, these are the things that fall into those examples of facilities costs, the F part of F&A. The cost of facility construction and the depreciation associated with that, custodial and janitorial services, maintenance and repair, environmental health and safety, library books, utilities, all of those things are bundled together as being part of the facilities portion of the facilities and administrative costs. On the administrative costs, examples are financial management, personnel management, procurement, human subjects protection. They also, when determining our F&A rates, they look at individual departments and individual colleges to see what percentage of their revenue is based on research and things. So when we begin to prepare for negotiation, and we just went through this process last spring, 2023, we do a survey of our space to determine how much of our space is assigned to research and instruction. And so we literally walk by and say, yep, this is Dr. Kirby's research lab. This is the classroom in which he teaches. And we write down what is the square foot. And we basically means we have a company we contract with called Maximus. That does this, but they do it with our guidance. But they determine this assignable square footage. So we can say what percentage of our physical infrastructure, because that's going to be part of our facilities and administrative costs, the F part of that, are borne by our research enterprise. Similarly, they start to dig into the financial records for all of the departments, all the offices and things to see what percentage of their activities are related. So for our most recent approved negotiation, they looked at the data in FY17 for our new rate that started in FY18. So they're always looking, that's why it's a retrospective. They look at what did we do in FY17 in terms of research. So they would go to we'll take procurement as an example. We spent a certain amount of money. We spent a certain amount of money in 2017 to buy materials and supplies and equipment and things that came off of grant awards. That's why our finance department has different numbers associated with grant accounts than there are with state funds and tuition funds. There's all this different numbering as part of that to make it easier to find those categories when they go into Banner to separate things out. And they'll look at, we bought so much stuff on grant funds. We bought so much stuff total. What percentage of our procurement was for grant funds? And then they would say, well, then we paid this much for salaries for people doing our procurement process, that percentage there, and this much space, that percentage there. And they work through that whole process. It's literally, there's like 700 pages in this document that we end up sending off to HHS to do the evaluation. But they work through that to count what is going to be that percentage that we charge for those facilities and rentals. So we've got our space, it's clean, the lights are on, and our checks don't bounce, because we like to get paid. So all of that goes into that calculation. Again, that's all dictated by federal regulation. And what we do is we propose an average rate. Again, this is part of OMB, Office of Management and Budget. They say we can't have different rates for different departments because, not surprisingly, the biomedical research that happens over in Lee Med is some of the most expensive research that we do, because we have folks that are there that are doing research, some people that are doing research that involves humans, animals, bugs, and chemicals, using all of our topics. That's very expensive to do. Similarly, we've got some research that is happening where people are writing down ideas on pieces of paper. Very different costs, but we don't get to charge difference. We have to present an average rate that was determined that process by the process that I just described on the preceding slides. We do have some different rates, however, because we get different rates for things that happen on campus or off campus, whether it's organized research. So that's the stuff that people are doing in their labs, is easy to do, or whether it's instructional. And there's also other sponsored projects. So an example of this might be the Small Business Development Center, which gets federal funds to help support small businesses, but they don't actually do research. So they're not an organized research, but they're still a sponsored activity. So there's a few different rates that are out there for us that we need to determine what category it goes into. But the bottom line is we end up proposing this average rate representing what the university does as a whole, because that's what OMB says we can do. And here are USD's rates. Yeah, these were based on a fiscal year 17 analysis of our space in our finances, and resulted in a negotiation. Our current rate is expired and at the end of 2023. That doesn't mean we can't use it. We keep on using the same one until we get a new one that's negotiated. So I'm not going to jail. Yay, that's a good thing. But based on the negotiations that we'd had with HHS, or not us, but Maximus had with HHS back in 2018, they said for organized research that happens on campus, it's 49.5. Off campus 26, other sponsored activity, that'd be the SBDC. If it's happening on campus, 28.5, off campus is 26. Instruction, 47% on campus, 26% off campus. Those are our negotiated rates. That's what we get to charge based on those sorts of activities. Again, that was done in 2017, usually 2017 numbers, and we just submitted stuff in 2023 using 2022 numbers. It's interesting that this example, 2017 data, the negotiation process started in 2018. Adam Roshine received the notice of award in 2021 for our 2018. So this takes a while to get these things negotiated. So we were using an expired rate for a few years, and that's what we're currently doing. But Melinda's used to writing a letter that says, yes, our rate is currently expired. However, we're under the process of negotiation. So that happens quite frequently. I think interesting. Yes, Jake.
You have idea what the new rate?
No idea. Nope. Sadly, we've got the San Francisco office, which my understanding is the slowest responding that there is. So some information about, there's a thing called the F&A cap. It's actually an A cap. In 1991, the government capped the administrative cost to universities at 26%. This was a result of at least a perception of some misbehavior on behalf of universities for inappropriately charging some administrative costs. It was supposedly going to last for a couple of years. That couple of years is now however many years old, 33 years old. And so that cap has been in place. When folks have gone through and done the analysis, they usually find that most universities' administrative costs are sitting around 32%. I'll talk a little bit about the details for USD. It's interesting that for-profit, nonprofit, other folks that receive federal awards have no cap that has been placed on their administrative stuff. And additionally, by statute, for-profit organizations can even charge a fee of up to 7%. And so if you ever get to participate in a small business innovation research program or those sorts of things, which are federal grant funds that go to small businesses, you can take profit and fee there. Even if you do an RO1 at a commercial entity, they get to take a fee on our profit of that. They are allowed to. I'm going to guess that your review team will say no, but you're at least statutorily allowed to make that request there. Now behind the scenes, so I'm going to kind of share some of the details that went into our FY17 calculus. Again, this happened before my time. When Maximus went through and did our assignable square footage, they poured through literally hundreds of pages of accounting information and looked at things. They determined that USD actually spends 33.14% on administrative costs, 31.83% on facilities related costs, for a total F&A of 64.97%. So Maximus took that data, that FY17 data, went to HHS and said, here, we should have a F&A rate of 64.97%. HHS said, well, no, maybe not quite so fast. When all was now, part of it is they're going to cap that administrative rate to 26%. That's set by statute back in 1991. So that just took off 7.14%. But we're still long of that. But then this is a negotiation process. And HHS came back with a number. Maximus came back with a number for us. And they eventually settled in at, well, you are paying quite a bit more than you should be getting. So in FY21, because again, we didn't get the award until, or the negotiation wasn't done until FY20 that we got the word. They said you can charge 48.5% in FY21, 49 in FY22, and 49.5 in FY23, and that's where we're currently residing. And so along with, so basically the university is really a major participant in the research enterprise. We are bearing a lot of cost for research that ends up happening here at USD. And our story isn't different than any other university. The National Science Foundation has looked at this. But I believe they determined that about 1/3 of all of the billions of dollars spent on research in academia comes from the universities, either directly funding research or through these sorts of unrecovered F&A costs. So the universities are really a key financial participant within the research enterprise. And then when we looked at the data from FY22, as Maximus prepared our package to go forth, they determined that our administrative rate was 31.53, facilities 30.49, which were both reductions from preceding years. Part of that is one of President Gestring's goals has been to make USD a very efficient place. And so we did have some shrinkage that happened within administrative offices really across the university. And then the facilities rate went down. We'd had on our books in FY17 much more interest in bond payments than we had in our books in FY22. So somewhere along the line, we paid off a big bill that was no longer. So we have a F&A rate of 62.02%. Again, it's going to be a little bit less than that because the 31.53 is going to be capped at 26. My understanding when talking with the person who did the negotiations back in 2018 for us, when the information was presented to HHS, they said, there's no way we're going to go above 50. And his hope this year is that we'll be able to go above 50, because now we've got several years where we have been sponsoring things and we're able to put in things that are going to be happening. The renovations that are going to be happening to Churchill Haynes are not inconsequential. The renovations that have happened to the Dakota Union, you get to describe all those things as part of your rate, because again, your rate's always determined based on 1 year's worth of data, and you have to build an argument for, well, that's not a static thing. There's going to be changes that and so that'll all be part of the negotiation. When we get that answer, I don't know. There is no obligation on their part to proceed on any sort of particular calendar or time. But the hope is that we will get a increase. I would say that the Maximus folks, their tea leaves, and they do this for a lot of institutions, because again, it's something that you only do every 5 years. So it would be really hard for the university to do this without having a consultant contractor to work with, because we don't do often enough. I think there was some hope that we'd be able to get probably a 1% bump going, but it'd be one of those things where it'd be like 50.5, 51, 51.5 when it gets going. But we'll see when that gets here. Hopefully they don't have us go backwards. That difference in our F&A rate and that our actual F&A rate versus the F&A rate that we charge is one way in which universities are contributing, participating in the research enterprise. There are other ways as well. When you look at many of the programs that we have here in the state of South Dakota, they either significantly limit the amount of F&A that can be charged for, or flat out don't allow it. But again, those are still caught. Our lights are still on, floors are still getting swept, paychecks are still getting written. So those are all things that are still occurring. Those are costs that we're still bearing for these activities, even though we're not getting reimbursed for them. Similarly, a lot of foundations have those same sorts of requirements. And there's also a lot of federal programs. The USDA as a whole, for anything that goes through their NEFA program, I forget what NEFA is an acronym for, but it's limited. Your F&A is limited to 30% of the total federal funds. So they put a cap on it. almost all the NIH training grants are capped at 8% indirects and things. And so the federal agencies even impose those sorts of caps. So it's important to keep in mind that USD, as well as all the other universities, are really key participants in and key contributors to financially the research that happens here and across the nation. Here at the University of South Dakota, and this is the way that we treat the indirect costs, the F&A that we receive. 90% of the F&A that we receive gets returned to the college. And then that makes complete sense because that was their money that's been paying for those bills that are always being incurred. And so that's that direction. We get a lot of requests from PIs. Hey, can we waive the indirects on this? Because that's not my money, that's the dean's money. I always say, yeah, talk to the dean. If the dean says, okay, I will waive the 10% portion that goes to my office and to the president's office. We're okay to participate in that, but I'm not going to waive the dean's money. I don't know how they are planning. So we'll always be asking you to secure that authorization, and we'll work with you to get that if necessary. But keep in mind that they are actual costs. Another question that we frequently get asked is, what can I spend F&A on? When those dollars come in, they are a reimbursement. And so there are no federal strings attached to that, unless you've done something like, say, you're going to be using that as part of the matching funds for an award. Then you tied strings onto it then. But otherwise, this is money that is the university's money that has already been spent. Again, it's been that reimbursement for those costs that have already been incurred. And so that is really up to what the dean or VP, depending on where the home department is, how they want to use those funds. I know some redistribute to faculty. There's all sorts of ways that our deans use those F&A funds. And I think they all use them well because USD is a very efficient research enterprise. Another question that pops up quite frequently is, can we pay for support staff on a grant? The answer is yes, but usually for typical, and again, this is straight from the mouth of the federal agencies. They usually, those normal activities are going to be part of the indirect cost pool. So they expect your dean, your department to be providing that administrative support that you need to operate your grant, because that was part of their calculation that they did, or that we did, in determining what the rate was. However, it is still a allowable cost if you can meet those three criteria that are integral to the federal award. So again, that's where you get that definition of a direct cost. If you can say, yes, this activity is directly related with that objective of the proposal, then you can support it. That you can specifically identify the individual. They really like people to name names whenever possible, rather than just a position. They're more lenient on that with graduate students. It's okay to list a graduate student as a graduate student on a budget, but they usually want to have names for other folks there. And then you also have to make sure that the funding source behind that position are not also recovered as indirect costs. That's what they call as being supplanted. So you can't just, to make your life easier to get a few extra bucks in your pocket, I'm going to pay them out of this pot, this federal pot, rather than the department pot that they'd already been paid out. And so things that we will look at from the Office of Research perspective is, what's the justification for the position? Because there can be, you can certainly envision things where having a program assistant be part of it. There are, the NIH COBRA program has an administrative core. That's a behemoth program that has lots of educational, lots of speaking. So you can easily justify, we need a program assistant to help run this. We need a percentage of that program assistant to help run this. If, however, I am a card carrying chemist. I got to buy some chemicals, so I'm going to pay for part of the program assistant to help order my chemicals. Well, when you look at the number of chemicals I'm buying for my research project, as opposed to the amount of chemicals being bought for the chemistry department, it'd be hard pressed to say they're putting any significant effort into that purchasing thing. So yes, you can do that, but you have to be really careful with what that justification is for why you need to pay for support staff as a direct cost, not as an indirect cost. They're assuming that they're getting paid on the indirect cost side of that. And then the on-campus, off-campus question comes up, because we got different rates depending what's there. You probably noticed that all of the off-campus rates are 26%. And that's because that is that capped administrative portion. So whether or not you're doing, so long as you're a USD employee, using USD IT and purchasing through USD purchasing, you're using that administrative portion regardless of where you're at. And so that's why we get that 26% rate for off-campus things that are. With that backdrop, where you're at is really not that important to whether or not it's off-campus or on-campus. If you are in a leased space off campus, but the university is paying for that lease, then that would be considered an on-campus project. Because again, the university is bearing those facilities costs by paying that lease for that space. If, however, that off-campus space, the lease is getting paid from the federal award, now the feds are going to say, well, you're not using your space, you're using our space. Or probably even if they were to, I would imagine there could be a scenario, actually this probably happened at the Gear Center in Sioux Falls. If a faculty investigator wanted to pay for a lease of a lab, because at the Gear Center, we do lease lab space out to companies. We probably could lease them out to a individual, but then we're going to lose the F part of your facilities and administration if that's getting charged to the contract, even though that's a USD space. So you probably could have off-campus stuff occurring on campus. That just popped into my head. And most of the time, field work, even though that's not occurring here on the campus, that would still be considered on-campus research because you're not paying to walk through the national grasslands or whatever it is. You're still bringing those data and idea back here for calculations and things. So that's the distinction between on-campus and off-campus, and that kind of wraps things up. Gina had hoped I would talk for 40 minutes. I made it 32. So, questions from folks or the audience? I'll stop sharing. I see there's some stuff in the chat, Gina. I don't know.
Okay, so let's say you have a project with a lot of statewide impact.
Yep.
So you're going to be traveling to all these different counties, and there's really going to be an impact to the state as a whole. Can I use the off-campus rate for that reason? What are your thoughts?
Nope. Yeah. And unless you're leasing an office, because you may very well have offices in different communities that you're going to that office. Then so long as that office was being paid for by the grant, because again, rental costs are a allowable direct cost. If that office were being paid for by the grant, then that would flip it into being an off-campus that was happening off-campus. But otherwise, you happen to be off-campus, but you're still part of that. What OMB tells us to do is we only get to propose one rate for everything that we do. And everything that we do includes stuff that happens on campus and field work that happens off campus, and that all gets reflected in that average rate that we get to charge. Other questions? Okay. Go ahead and ask.
I mean, well, first off, building off the field work part.
Yep.
So I think historically, our department has usually used an off-campus rate for field work, but the thought, as you laid out, the facilities aren't really being used in that case. I mean, I should say helpful. Yeah, some of the field work, you have to bring everything back and do all the analysis in facilities. I can see your argument, but there are sort of surveys and things like that where the majority of the time spent working out in the field, is that still defensible as an off-campus rate? If you're really not, yeah. And repeat my question to people on that.
Yeah, well, basically Jake is asking about doing field work that's not here. They've historically charged that off-campus rate, that 26% rate, because the work wasn't happening here. We can do that. Again, I'm not going to go to jail for not charging enough money on the indirect costs. You might want to talk with the dean, because I would say that is one that we should be charging the on-campus rate, because that is what the OMB reflects, in that they just want an average rate. So that'd be the same thing. The folks in Lee Med we are not 49.5% doesn't even begin to touch what their actual indirect costs are. The way that we make up for that is that we get full on those that are cost a lot less than that 49.5%. So that's why they use that single average rate. If you look, there's quite a few medical schools where that's all they do is biomedical research, and they are in expensive areas. So their janitors are obscenely expensive, their repairs are obscenely expensive. Where they will have an F&A rate over 100%. I don't know. I see we haven't ever broken down to know what our biomedical research rate is, but the reason that we ask for the average is to try to recognize that 49.5% probably doesn't cover that. And so there is a bit of subsidization that ends up happening because we can only ask for one.
I look forward to telling my colleagues subsidizing
those are the OMB rules. We get to ask one rate.
But so the percentage approach is interesting, I guess. Like, because you have to do it one way, I guess.
Yep.
Right? But so the percentage approach, though. But tell me what you think about, if we are trying to raise more grant dollars as an institution, that's sort of a recent,
Correct.
goal. Does that affect the calculations if you bring in double the grant dollars? You know what I mean? Like, because of the percentages. Does that generally then, would that translate at some point to a lower, because if you're not increasing the facilities,
Right,
allowed and you're not increasing the staff, then it seems like those costs, other than inflation, are going to stay somewhat fixed. But if you double the grant dollars, am I interpreting that as that if we set up a Maximus or Optimus,
right,
they would come back with a lower rate? Am I thinking about that correctly? Question or no?
Well, I think we'd probably have a hard time doubling our, just practically, I think it'd be hard to double without doubling other things as well. And so I'm going to guess it's going to largely come out in the wash, because our F&A rates are pretty consistent with other places. I do know at USD, we are a exceptionally efficient research institution. Most have probably heard that there's going to be changes to how R2 and R1 is calculated, where it's going to be just strictly a numbers-based thing. You've got to have more than $50 million in external funding and more than 70 PhDs granted a year, you're an R1. So it's purely an aggregate number. In the current methodology, the methodology that's being replaced, they looked at how well you did in aggregate, what's going to be the new method, but also how well you did on a per capita basis. USD, because we're small, our aggregate numbers were low. But when you look at our per capita, we are in the top half of the deck. There's like, I think 137 R2s. We are number 11 in there, and we are above the median when you look at R1s and R2s. So USD, from a research productivity perspective per faculty member, we do really well. And so I think if we were to try to double, there would be a commensurate increase in other things that we have to do. We need more space, higher quality space, so those costs are going to go up. Any other questions? Go ahead and ask, Jake.
How do you propose we sell this back? Like, so, there's a few points on this. I feel like from the dean's office and the Office of Research, then having more F&A is better because it's reimbursement. But I think it's hard to escape the initial friends clip that you showed, but the fact is.
Yeah.
So as a department chair, how can you help me to communicate this to faculty in a way that, basically, you get what I'm saying, basically. Like, I think that there probably is, I think, since I became a faculty member, the scrambling about, the bureaucrats taking our money and never.
Yep. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. So that is it.
Or things like that, how to change that narrative or think about that differently.
Yeah. As far as I know, this is a problem that everybody has. Now I do think part of it is just in the way that the budget process works, because you go through your details, you build your budget justification for the great work we're going to do, and oh, by the way, we're going to hit you with 49.5% tax is certainly the concept or the belief that is out there. But I haven't heard anybody come up with a good way to describe that to faculty, other than spending an hour kind of talking about it. I do think the oil change example is a good way to do it. You need that building in order for the research to you need that building for the oil change to occur. We need the building, the space, and those are costs that we're incurring regardless of what's happening.
I think it'd be easier if federal agencies listed.
Well, and some do. Like many of the an RO1 from NIH, you propose your direct costs, and then you strap the indirect on the end. There's other ones. The National Science Foundation has just this is your bottom line, and that's where faculty really get. It's like, what? I wanted to do $100,000 worth of research, but I only get to do $66,000 research because you're going to take it. Yeah, I completely know where it comes from. Yes.
To add to what Jake said, ecologists have this unique problem in that we cannot bring samples back, especially if it's international travel.
Yep.
Where this involves bringing back soil samples or plant samples.
Yep.
Because they might be invasive and deep invasive plant and animal and soil.
Yeah.
So the fact is, we might have, it might be not conducive to hit us with on campus because we're only bringing back numerical information in Excel files.
Yeah, and for that again, when we start talking about waiving or reducing indirect costs, I'll bring the dean into that conversation because again, that's not my money to give away. So I try not to give away other people's money.
Like an example you can give of when it would be 26%, like maybe something we're currently doing now, or
Small Business Development Center.
Go ahead and repeat that question.
Yeah. So Melinda asked the question: is there an example of off-campus doing off-campus stuff? And that would be the Small Business Development Center. Now, it's not a research project. It's more of a sponsored activity, so they'd be capped at that 28.5% on campus. But the Small Business Development Center has its main offices in Sioux Falls, in a space that the SBA, the Small Business Administration, the grant dollars that pays the rent to Avera for that space. And so we charge 26% because the SBDC staff, they're still USD employees, they're still using our payroll services, they're still using our IT folks. But that's a very explicit example of a off-campus site that's doing off-campus stuff. And so basically for the two examples, Jake and Ranjit, that you gave, the federal agencies would allow us to take the 49.5%. We don't have to take anything because again, these are all retrospective. The way that the analysis is determined. If the dean says it's okay, I'll stick my thumbs up and agree because that's always been my perspective because I get a pretty small slice actually out of it. So and I am a proponent of having whatever research happen. We want to do more of this, but I do think it's important for people to understand that the university puts a lot of dollars into the research activities occurring. I think as often as that thought is, I think, frequently missed. But well, as an example, where the Gear Center in Sioux Falls. I don't know how many people are familiar with that. It's the Graduate Education Applied Research Center that's up there. It's a 20,000 square foot building. It's got a bunch of labs in it and things. I was part of and that is a on-campus place that's not off campus. But I got a really distinct experience with facilities in this building because we don't, here on the main campus, we've got our centralized facilities, heat tunnels that run around this. In Sioux Falls, we don't have that. So you have electric companies and gas companies that you get to pay. And we moved into our 20,000 square foot building, and I started to get the monthly bills for gas and electric in a 20,000 square foot building with labs. Anybody want to take a guess what the annual expense, just heating and cooling of a 20,000 square foot building? Keep in mind, a house is maybe 2,500 square feet. So, this is 8 times the size of it. So we want to take a guess at how much it costs to heat and cool a building with hoods. The first bills we got took us on a path to $200,000 a year. And then I realized it's really important to close the sashes on the hoods because that really increases the amount of air. So I became the close the hood Nazi to the point that now people do routinely close their hoods, and we operate at about $125,000, $130,000 a year just to heat and cool a 20,000 square foot building. Yeah, that's always happening in the background. That's part of the doors being open and the lights being on. And for the most part, most days, the heat being on. There's things where that can go sideways. But it's an incredibly expensive operation, particularly the research operation. And one thing that one of the drawbacks of having a president who is an accountant is she understands the direction of cash flow for the research enterprise. We are subsidizing the university is. The cash flow is wrong from a research perspective. It's all, this is not a money maker for folks. And a lot of people tend to think, oh, F&A, that's this big money maker for the university. It is not. The fact that we've got this research enterprise going on, we're short almost 50% of what we should be. That's the investment that the university is making through its general funds and other funds into the research enterprise. And that might be the message to try to convey to faculty, is that the university really is participating a lot and very intentionally to do so. Because President Gestring has never took, back to your question of doing more and doing more, we're actually going to go backwards further and further. And President Gestring is yet to tell me to stop what we're trying to do. So, any other questions? Now we're up to 48 minutes. All right. I can kill time, Jake. We've been proud before many times.
All right, I got a question. Let's say I have a really big proposal and my budget's going to work a lot better if I use a couple different indirect rates because I'm doing all this international travel. So I want to use the off-campus for that. But then for the salaries and the other items, I want to use the on-campus for that. What are your thoughts on that plan? Talk to your dean.
That's not my money. Yeah, what you described, it sounds like we would be able to charge the full indirect cost rate on that. Now, a lot of international stuff they actually do put caps on because there are things that they recognize you can't do on international stuff. But unless there's something that statutorily allows, unless there's a program that within its terms of the program cap the indirect rate, we're going to charge. My response will always be charge the whole indirect rate or talk to your dean and document that conversation with the dean. Because again, that's their money, not mine. And they've already, like I said, they're contributing a lot to this. Okay, anything else? All right. Oh, sorry.
One more. Okay, so back to the question on support staff. Can you explain a situation where it would be appropriate to perhaps budget 10% time for a professional assistant in the budget? But we know now that most of the time we should not be doing that.
Right. Well, I say there are specific, like NIH Cobras that you've got to a administrative core that's going to have support staff that would be part of that. And that'd be entirely appropriate there because that's an expectation of that program. And so you're probably going to see it in a lot of those more programmatic things where there's just going to be new duties or additional duties or just above and beyond sort of thing. So if you have a maybe a National Science Foundation Research Trainingship Fellowship program or something like that, that you're going to be bringing in this larger than normal cohort of students to achieve that objective of your NRT, design thinking, whatever it is going to be. So we're going to need a program assistant partially dedicated to that because of the unique things of the program to uniquely advise them. So long as you can describe that within your justification, why it's important, most likely the program officer is going to say it. But I do worry if you can't make that strong justification within your budget justification, that the program officer is going to strike that line. They may fund you, but say, no, what you described sounds like that's what your support staff should be doing is that. So we're just going to draw a line through that. They're going to take away that direct cost and the associated indirect costs. They would probably still fund you if they thought it was a great idea. They're just going to say, no, that sounds like something that you should be, that your department chair or your dean or your university should be paying for as part of somebody's normal day job. But you can certainly think of situations where, hey, this is going to place a large demand on our support staff and we need to add somebody or we need to get some additional training in there. But it's going to really hinge on that budget justification that you can craft. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all.